Hey there, drone fans. Rick here again from Drone Valley. In today's clip, I'd like to answer the 10 most popular questions you guys have sent me over the last few weeks about the brand new Mavic 2. Now, obviously, I got more questions than 10, and I couldn't possibly answer them all in one clip, or we'll be here for 4 hours, and you'll never tune into the channel again. So what I've done is groomed through all of the emails and texts and tweets you've sent me to find the 10 most common questions. These are the ones that the most people asked about, so I felt they were the most critical. I promise you I'm going to do follow-up clips where I go through some of the other questions in those clips and answer as many as I can over time. If your question didn't make it into today's clip, that just means you're either a little smarter or a little more weird than the other guys, but it'll definitely get into one of the other clips that I'm going through. So if I don't answer the question you've got today in this clip, drop them in the comments below, and I promise to add them to the list of the other clips that I'm working on to answer the rest of those questions. I want to give you as much information as I can about this product or the technology in general. Having said all that, I'm going to have a time code listed down in the bottom in the comments for all the questions I'm answering, because if I'm talking about something you could care less about because you know everything there is to know about the goggles, you can skip that and move on to the next question, and you can go through that list and find one that's interesting to you to get the answers you need very quickly. You don't have to listen to the whole clip and me ramble on about technologies that you already understand. Having said all that, some of these questions are pretty easy to answer. They're yes or no answers, and I'll give you a little bit of detail on it. Other questions are going to take a little bit more time to go through the whys of things, how they work or they don't work, and I want to spend the time needed to explain that to you. So I'll front load this clip with a lot of the more complicated questions, which curiously turned out to be the most popular questions. So the first couple are going to be a little bit longer segments than the ones at the end where I'll go through them pretty quickly. So before I get into it too deep, let me just say, I love these quads, and I mentioned that before. I was very excited to get them. We were at the launch event, and I was blown away by the capabilities inside the quads. And I've been flying both the Pro and the Zoom almost nonstop for the last couple of weeks. I've been charging batteries at night, going out flying all day. I'm charging them in the car when I'm driving to a new location. I just love having these birds up in the air. And as much fun as I have flying these things, I've also spent a lot of time down here in the shop taking them apart, checking out the technology, going through the software to understand what all the features and functions do, comparing them to other quads. So I really had a kind of a nerd fest over the last 2 weeks. Not a lot of sleep, but a whole lot of time with these quads, comparing them to others and understanding what they've done when they gave birth to these brand new Mavic 2s. And I think my honest opinion from an engineering perspective is it's an amazing machine. It's an incredibly sophisticated, top of the line, years ahead of the competition machine. And I know there's some complaints out there that it doesn't have all the features of the Mavic Pro. It's missing precision landing, and you can't set the timing for when it discharges, and a few other things aren't in there. But remember, in my opinion, they put this thing out as quickly as they could to get it to 95% of what it's going to be as a fully fleshed out quad. A lot of those features can absolutely be added back in firmware down the road. Precision landing is a good example of that. It's not there today. It will be there in a future version. All the guts of what's needed to make that happen are in the quad. So a lot of people are saying, I'm not going to buy it until everything's implemented. I wouldn't recommend doing that. And I'm not trying to sell you the quad, but I love flying. And if you're telling me from a manufacturing perspective, I'm going to put the quad out and it's going to be about 80% of what you're going to want, but we'll update it later, but I get to fly it for a couple of months before summer ends, that's what I want to do. So I'm happy they put it out. I'm fully confident they're going to implement a lot of those other features with future firmware updates, so we'll get to that. All right, so enough about that. Let's get into the actual question. So the first question I got, which was by far the most popular question, had to do with the batteries. And a lot of you asked, can I use my Mavic Pro charger to charge the Mavic 2 batteries? Is there a 5-in-1 charger out there? Can I charge it in my car? Can I charge it through the quad? So there's a million questions around the battery. So let's start with the charging question. When you hold these batteries side by side, you should know pretty quickly that this one's a lot bigger. It's a lot physically bigger, it's a lot heavier, and that's because there's extra cell in there. There's another cell that makes this a bigger battery with better capacity. So if you look on the bottom, you've got a specification of 15.4 volts here and 11.4 volts there. That should be a pretty good indication you can't use this charger to charge this battery. So they are different chargers. Even more importantly, they're different connectors. And what I mean by that is, on the original Mavic Pro charger, which I have here, it's a bipolar connector. I don't know if that's the correct term for it, but it doesn't have a keying on it, so you can put it in one way. You can also flip it around and put it in the other way. So there's no right way to put it in there. It's a lot like a USB-C connection, which means it's really easy to charge it. You pop it on, you're off and running. With the Mavic 2, first of all, it's a different connector. You can't plug it in there, but the Mavic 2 does have a polarity to it. So if you look at the connector, and I'll do a blow up of this, there's actually a little slant on the side here, a little divot. It can only go on one way. So that's the only way it'll charge. I can't put it on the wrong way, and I can't stick it on, when it's not aligned. So it definitely is a polarized connector that they're trying to make sure that you're not going to mix up your chargers, because again, in a dark room, you might have both of these plugged in and this dangling over the edge of the desk. It'd be pretty easy to grab the wrong one and try and charge the battery. So I think they did a good job of protecting you from making that mistake. Another thing I noticed about these batteries, which is pretty cool, is when I align them so they look the same, they've actually put the connectors on the bottom on different ends. So on the Mavic Pro, it's up here. On the Mavic 2, it's down here. So not that you would try to muscle this thing into the quad, but there's just no way physically you can get it in the quad if you make the mistake and grab the wrong battery. But you also wouldn't have to worry about the connections mating because they're at opposite ends of the actual battery. So it did a real good job with that. As far as the chargers go, the Mavic Pro original charger was a 13-volt charger. The brand new Mavic 2 is a 17.6-volt charger. And one thing I'll talk about with the charger quickly, and I missed this during the unboxing because I was so damn excited to get outside and fly this thing. But on the original Mavic Pro charger, you have the connector for the battery here, and you have two full-size USB-A connections on the end that you can use to charge any external device, the controller, a phone, a tablet, whatever, any standard USB device. On the Mavic 2, when I pulled this thing out of the box, it's got one USB connection on it. And I was a little puzzled by that because I'm thinking, why would you go from 2 to 1? Well, it turns out they didn't. They actually put a little hidden connector on the side that I completely missed, and a lot of you guys corrected me on that, that has a micro USB connection on it that you can use to charge your controller, and you can use this to charge your phone or your tablet. So nice little setup. Now, I will talk a little bit about the charger. I feel like, maybe this is a critical point, but I feel like the charger is a little bit undersized for charging a battery of this size, as well as the controller, as well as like a tablet or something larger. So my recommendation for you would be not charge everything at one time, because I've noticed when I connect up the controller to here, my phone or tablet to this, and the battery, this gets really hot. And hot is not a good thing for electronics. That means it's working harder than it should. And I think the challenge that DJI had with the charger was, if they make it big enough to not get hot when they charge everything, it's going to be the size of a laptop brick. No one's going to take that with them when they have a portable drone. So they had to sort of balance the size of the charger with the current output of the charger. And my recommendation would be, even though you can charge all three at the same time, I would recommend strongly that you choose between either using the USB connections, so charge your controller and your tablet at the same time, or charge the battery. Don't do both at the same time. I mean, you can if you want, and I don't know, long term we'll see if that thing eventually lasts or doesn't last, but my recommendation would be charge the USB devices first, then charge the battery. All right, another question I got was about the hub. There's some confusion out there about the hub. So the hub's really nice. If you bought the Fly More combination, you got this hub. A lot of people bought it and thought, well, this is great. Now I can plug my charger into it. And again, it goes in the bottom, just like it did on previous models of the hubs. And once you plug the charger into the bottom of it and plug it into the wall, you can charge 4 batteries in this thing at the same time. Now that's tricky wording right there because you can't really charge them at the same time. You can charge them in order. So it's a sequential charger, which means if I plug 4 of them in, the charger's got brains built into it to look at all 4 of those batteries, pick the battery that needs the least amount of charge that first, then move on to the next battery that needs the least amount of charge, then move on to the next battery. So over a couple of hours, it'll charge all 4 batteries, but it doesn't blast the current to all 4 batteries simultaneously because, again, the power supply is not powerful enough to do that. So I like it because it's one of those things where I can put the batteries on it, it's near my desk, I can keep an eye on it when I'm working on my computer, and they eventually get charged. In the old days with the Mavic Pro or Mavic Pro Platinum, we came out with an aftermarket accessory that actually simultaneously charged 3 batteries at the same time, as well as 2 USB connections on the end. Now, there is a charger out for the Mavic 2 that I've been testing. There's actually 3 that I'm testing for the last couple of weeks that'll do the same thing for the Mavic 2. I'm just about done with my testing. One of them I like an awful lot. The other 2 are kind of sketchy. So when I make the decision on which one we're going to carry, we'll put it up on the website. But just rest assured that if you didn't buy the Fly More combination and you're trying to charge those batteries a little bit more quickly, you can use one of these things that charges 3 batteries and 2 USB connections at the same time. They're not cheap, but they're not terribly expensive. And for me, getting out and fly quicker is a good thing. So that's just something to consider. All right, I think that's it for the power supplies. The next question I wanted to move on to had to do with the CrystalSky. Now, I love the CrystalSky Monitor. I've been using this thing with my Phantom and my Mavic because it's so bright, it's so clear, and it's just a wonderful device to use. It runs a closed version of Android. It's got DJI Go on there, so it just runs and it's fantastic and very, very quick. It's not the cheapest, but it works great. The problem is you can't use it with the Mavic 2 yet. And the reason for that is 2 things. Number one, the firmware inside that CrystalSky hasn't been updated to include the Mavic 2 as an option. So right now I'm using an iPad Mini 4, which is great because it fits into the handles on the bottom. I use a short little cable, and I'll have links to all this stuff down below if you want to go check it out. But you can use a short cable on the bottom. The challenge with this, in addition to the firmware not being updated on the CrystalSky yet, which again, I don't know how you missed that, because if you're releasing a Mavic 2, somebody in the division that builds the CrystalSky should have said, we've got to include the Mavic 2 in the firmware for the CrystalSky, so why would you update the firmware for this but not update the firmware for that? But at any rate, it's coming, it's not there yet, so that's your biggest hurdle, is that it doesn't know the Mavic 2 exists, so it can't actually connect up to it. So that's one of the things you're going to trip over. The second thing, which is even more puzzling to me, is the fact that the mount for this, so if I look at the original Mavic Pro, you mount the CrystalSky Monitor mount on the bottom of this thing, and there's a bracket that fits in underneath here and screws in nice and tight. Then the CrystalSky plugs in on the bottom like this, and it's hanging below the controller. That mount doesn't fit in the new controller, and it's puzzling to me because when you look at this thing, they look pretty darn close comparatively. The problem is when you look at the bottom, those slits are not the same. Now, a lot of people have talked about the slits being smaller. They're not actually smaller, and what I mean by smaller is they're not physically smaller this way or this way. What they are, though, if you look very close, and I'll do a blow-up of this, is they're positioned differently. So on the Mavic 2, they're a little bit closer in when it's closed, and the Mavic Pro and the other quads that are out there, they're a little further out. So what that means is the bracket that fits this won't fit this. And I'm pretty honest about all my reviews. I don't understand, and this is going to be critical, I don't understand if you're designing the Mavic 2, how an engineer can say, let's change the handles without reminding themselves that we've got a bracket out for the CrystalSky that fits the old controller that a guy like me may want to move over to my Mavic 2. So there's going to be apparently a new controller bracket coming out for the Mavic 2s, which means I have to buy another bracket. I've got to carry two pieces with me. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. I guess what they did here, and again, I'm supposing a lot, is they realized a lot of us are using this iPad Mini 4 in the bottom, and they just made it easier to fit in there. So it does go in here a little easier than it went into the Mavic Pro. Maybe that's it. I'm trying to give them some out for why you would do that. I can't believe it would be an oversight, because if I'm building these older controllers for the Mavic Pro, I've already got the molds built. So why would I change the mold for these handles? I would just, change the material I'm building it out of to gray as opposed to black to make it work. So those are the two problems with the CrystalSky. I'm sure they're going to fix them both. I'm sure they're heavy at work on the CrystalSky bracket, and they probably have firmware coming for this very soon. And I promise you I'll do an update clip as soon as they do, and that'll be at. But again, very frustrating because I wanted to use the CrystalSky to fly this thing, and you can't at this point. All right, the third thing I want to talk about is this unique feature that a friend of mine, Original Dobo, came across. And he's been flying this thing like crazy like I am. He's obsessed with quads. He's out there flying the thing day and night. And he stumbled across, maybe he's smarter and he figured it out, but I think he stumbled across this ability to pan the camera. Now, I'll get into this in a bit with the headset, but you can pan the camera with the headset, but you can't pan the camera from the remote controller. But you can pan the camera from the application. So when you're flying the Mavic 2s, if you put your finger on the glass and hold it there, you'll see a little blue circle come up. If you swipe it right, swipe it left, swipe it up or down, you'll move the camera in that direction. Now, it's an interesting hidden feature. Again, that Original Dobo found, and I'll put a link below to his channel. He's a brilliant guy, comes up with a lot of good stuff. He's really into quads, and I love watching his clips. But I wondered why they did that. Like, why would you do that and then not talk about it? And I think what it is probably an artifact of the programming that's in there for the headsets. Because the headset goggles, when you put them on, the DJI goggles, if you move your head, you're moving the camera. So it's going to move where you're looking. That seems to be an artifact that somehow got through the programming where you can control it from the screen as well. Because when you connect this thing up and you tether this to the actual drone, you're controlling it from the headset and you're seeing what's going on the screen. So I think there's some crossover between those two. I don't know, but anyway, it's pretty cool. But then I'm thinking, when would I ever use it? Because if I'm filming something, I'll turn the quad to face it. Well, there are times where I'm going to pick a point of interest, where I'm flying towards that point of interest, and I may at that point want to spin the camera to catch something on either side. If I touch those joysticks in most cases, it'll abort that program. So having that, and I haven't tested this, but I'm pretty sure it works, I'm going to try and vary the vision of that camera side to side using that feature while I'm going towards a point of interest. So that'll be kind of cool. Probably do a clip on that when I come up. But nice little hidden feature there for the panning. Let's talk about the goggles. I got a lot of questions about the DJI goggles, and I love these goggles. I fly with them an awful lot. I'm a little bit of an older guy, so I get a little bit dizzy. If I wear them more than a half an hour, 45 minutes, I get vertigo. But I do like using them when I have a spotter with me, and they're great, and they work great with all the quads. So people are saying, can I use the original generation of DJI goggles with the Mavic 2? So the short answer is you absolutely can. You do have to update the firmware to include the DJI Mavic 2 profile, because it doesn't have it in there. Obviously, it's an older version of DJI Go 4, but they have it out. You update that through the DJI Assistant program, which is the one you load on your computer. You hook up a USB cable, you push the firmware to it, you're up and running. It's great. The challenge is it doesn't work as well as the brand new goggles. So these are the original DJI goggles. There's another set that are black called the Racing Edition, or REs. Those are a little more sophisticated goggles because they're built, curiously enough, for FPV racing, which DJI at this point doesn't make an FPV racer. They make a frame, they make motors, they make controllers, but they don't make a racer. So that should be pretty interesting to think about, right, for future products. But anyway, These are the originals, the black ones are the REs. The REs will operate on both a 2.4 gigahertz and a 5.8 gigahertz frequency. This guy's on both frequencies. These only operate on a 2.4 gigahertz, so that means a couple of things. Number one, it's going to be a slower transmission, right? So there's a difference in speed. So for example, I have to read this. This is 110 milliseconds to 190 millisecond delay, which means what's happening in the quad by the time it gets back to your vision is between 110 and 190 milliseconds off. Now that's not a lot of time, but if you're flying fast and there's a lot of trees around, that's a lot of time. With the REs, they've cut that down to 50 to 70 milliseconds. So it's a much faster response time, and I think it's because they're using 2.4 gig and 5.8 gig, and they're spreading the bands where they transmit on one and receive on the other and moving video across to either one of them. So it's a lot more synchronized with the quad when you're flying, so that's an advantage. But you also have some limitations on control. So with this one, there's a limited amount of pan you can do, whereas with the REs, which I don't own a set yet, I've got a set ordered, with the REs you get a much wider pan. So I think you can use these. It's a bit of a limited functionality. It also cuts down on your distance a little bit too, I think. It also cuts down for sure on the resolution. I think it's a 720p as opposed to a 1080p, which really matters when you're inside that virtual environment. So the short answer is you can use them, but they're not quite as fleshed out as the REs would be if you go with that set itself. All right, the next question I had to do with the box. Now, a lot of you guys picked up on this label on the side. So on the box, when you got it, it's got this label on the bottom that says, made for iPhone. And people saw that and said, well, hold on a second, I have an Android product. Like, does that mean I can only use this with iPhone? Or do they have some partnership with Apple? What's going on here? Why does that say made for iPhone? What that means is it's a certification, basically, that says they're going to test all this gear and the application against the iOS operating system. And they get this certification called MFI. A lot of you probably know this already, but if you don't, it's MFI, which means it's MFI certified or made for iPhone certified. All that label means is that they've certified the application and the technology to work with Apple, and it's been blessed by Apple. So it's an MFI certified device and software and all the rest of it. So it works fine on Android. I mean, there's an Android application out the day it was released. It'll work on both platforms fine. I know that was really confusing, but if you look below that, you also have application here that says Google. Get it on the Google Store. Get it on the Apple Store. So the application's available on both, and I know that was really confusing, but I got an alarming number of questions asking me, is it only going to work on iPhone? Because I don't want to run an iPhone. Next question has to do with the gimbal cover. Let me get some of this stuff out of the way. I got too much tech up here. All right, so the gimbal cover on this one's a little bit interesting because it's got, in one cover, it's got both a piece underneath that holds the gimbal and a piece up top that covers the gimbal. And a lot of people have asked me, can I fly this with the gimbal cover on? It should be obvious you can't, because this base underneath holds that camera steady, so that won't move around. The gimbal won't be able to do self-adjustments during power on, self-test. In fact, you can actually damage the gimbal if you leave this thing on and power up the quad. So you absolutely have to take it off. But then people were saying, well, Rick, if I take it off, can I pull that piece out and fly with the globe on? That's not going to restrict the movement of it. I suppose you could, but think about it for a second. You're shooting a camera, an image, which is a high-quality 1-inch sensor, or the zoom, through this plastic. Don't you think the sun's going to reflect off all the inside? Don't you think the quality of the image is going to be degraded by this piece of plexiglass in front of it? So, I mean, experimentally, yeah, I could fly it with the globe on, I guess, if I took this guy out, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would say, just like I did with the Mavic Pro, take the globe off, because a lot of people that are thinking, oh, well, this will give me extra protection if I crash. The honest truth is, if you crash and this thing hits anything hard, this is going to shatter, and those shards of plastic are going to come right back inside that camera assembly and probably cause more damage than if this thing fell and hit something on its own. You just have to take your chances when you're flying. You have to be smart about it. Turn on crash avoidance if you're not used to flying in really crowded environments around trees and stuff, and just be mindful of the fact that you may eventually crash someday, and if that happens, maybe the camera will get damaged. The good news is, not that hard to change the camera. It's 6 screws. You can pull it out, change it yourself in your basement. All right, so the next question I had to do with transferring files. A lot of people are confused about, how do I transfer the files? Do I use a USB-C connection, which you can do. There's a connector on the bottom here that allows you to hook up a USB, oops, on the side, sorry, right there. USB-C connection on the side, so I can connect that up to my computer, and lo and behold, the storage inside and the SD card show up on my computer, and I can transfer the files. You could certainly do that. I like yanking the SD card. I don't use the 8 gigs of onboard memory that often. I use a 64 gig memory card. I carry a couple of them with me. So if it's a long day of flying, about halfway through, I pull out the card, slap a new card in, and then fly with that card. And I do that for a couple of reasons. Primarily, I do it because if I lose the quad, which hasn't happened yet, but it could dunk in a lake, I've got the morning at least on a SD card someplace. Also, SD cards fail, so I don't want to get all the way through a 10-hour day of flying and find out that I've got a bad SD card and I've lost all my footage. So I like 2 SD cards with me. I like pulling the SD card out for one main reason. is the transfer is a lot faster because these are big files, especially if you're recording in 4K. And if you're trying to transfer that over a USB-C connection, that's slow stuff. That'll take a long time. And I'm an impatient guy. I want to get back and put that stuff on my computer and start editing it. So for me, I pull out the card, move it to an adapter for my USB 2.0 and stick it into my computer 3.0 and stick it on my computer, transfer the files that way. There is a bit of a trade-off because there is some wear and tear on the cards by pulling them out and putting them back in, but I'm very gentle with them. So it's up to you how you want to do it. You can transfer them both. The one thing you can't do by pulling the card out, though, is if you decide to use the internal memory, the only way you can transfer those files off is by going through the USB-C connection and transferring those over to your computer. And that's one of the reasons I don't use the internal 8 gigs is because I don't want to deal with the whole cabling, hook it up, and transfer the file. So it's up to you how you want to do it. You can move the card or you can connect up the USB-C. Whatever you prefer is working just fine. Another question I had was, can I record audio? One of the interesting features about the Mavic Pro was that you could turn on a feature inside the software that as you're filming, you're caching the video that you're seeing and recording to your device. And you can also use the mic in that device to record audio over top of the video that you're recording. So that's a pretty cool feature because you can do sort of a commentary, a running commentary of what you're viewing, and it's recorded together with that. So the two things to remember, though, is that's being cached on the device you have, which means you've got to have space in there to be able to record that, because that recording is what's called a cyclic recording, which means it's going to eat its own tail. So if you set up 2 gigs of space in there and the file goes over 2 gigs, the first part of that recording gets over-recorded by what you're recording now. So you're always constantly eating that available space with the recording. So if you record for a long period of time and you have a small amount of storage on there, you're going to end up with just the last, whatever, 15 minutes of your recording. So be careful about that. The second thing is you need to turn that on in the software application. So there's 2 things you need to do. The first thing you got to turn on is to enable video caching on your local device, and that could be your phone or your tablet you're using with the controller. Now what you're looking at here is inside the DJI Go 4 applications on the general settings page, right near the bottom, I've toggled 2 of these functions. The first one is cache during video shooting, and what that does is take whatever video is being recorded on the quad and cache it or save it on your local device. And again, that's a cyclic thing where it's going to actually record up to the amount of cache that you give it. The second is where it turns on the audio. Now you can't turn on audio without having the first one on because you can't really record audio without recording the video. So you want to turn on the video first, and once you turn that on, it gives you the option then to turn on the audio. Now with both of those on, what's going to happen is what you're seeing on the quad is going to be cached to your local device. It's going to sort of be saved there. The audio is going to be layered on top of it. You can then save that to your device later on, and you can use that for your commentary when you're flying, or you can transfer it to your video editing software to edit into a clip you're creating. Now a lot of people ask me, Rick, I don't really want to record the audio. Why would I ever use that function? I still recommend you turn on at least that first setting, because what that's going to do is it's going to record the behavior of the quad while you're recording for as long as the cache inside that device will support it. And that'll become important if you ever lose your quad, because think about it for a second. If that quad takes a nosedive someplace and you have to find it later on, what you've got on your device is maybe the last minute or 2, or maybe 10 if you've got enough space on there, of the flight of that quad. Now it's going to be a bit of a horror show to watch that, because obviously the quad fell out of the sky and it's landed someplace in a field or a tree, but having that cache on your phone or your tablet at least gives you a little bit of insight into the last couple of minutes of that flight. So maybe you can spot a landmark out there, or you can see where it fell in a field or what direction it was facing. So for me, it's a great troubleshooting tool to have that cached on my local device. Now again, it's going to eat up as much space as you give it on the local device, to just be smart about that. All right, so kind of a cool feature. The next thing I want to talk about is the precision landing. There's been a lot of conversations around that. I did a whole clip on it explaining how the new Mavic 2s don't have precision landing enabled yet. I don't think it's that big a deal. I know a lot of people are pretty aggressive about, I'm not going to buy the quad until that feature's been implemented because I use it all the time. In the clip I said, I don't use it that often. It's kind of a neat thing to have, sort of to show people that it's that accurate and can land exactly where it took off. But again, as a pilot, I really believe that the 2 things you have to learn the minute you start flying is how to take off the quad and land the quad perfectly. So I love that last minute and a half of flight where I'm bringing it in around that mat and bringing it down and trying to land it exactly on top of that H. I do that manually, and I feel like that's a skill that I want to perfect. The precision landing does that automatically for you. Now, the reason it's not there is up to speculation. Nobody really knows. My thoughts on it are that DJI wanted to get the quad out in the field in time for the end of summer so people could fly it, and then they could add these features back in later on. And precision landing wasn't one of those features that was an absolutely must-have kind of feature in the quad. And I've done a lot of development projects with companies I've worked at, and there's a roadmap conversation that takes place when you're getting close to a launch date, and there's certain features that are in the first release of the firmware and some that didn't make the cut for the first release of the firmware that'll show up later. Now, DJI has already said that they're going to build that into a future version of the firmware, so I don't think it's that big a deal, but it isn't in there at day one. But to be honest with you, it gets pretty close to home. And if you want to watch that clip, I did, I don't know, 15, 20 landings to show you exactly how accurate it is, even without precision landing. And pretty much every one of those, if I averaged them, landed within a couple of feet of the actual mat. And I took control at the last minute to actually nudge it over to land on that mat. To me, that's close enough, because return to home for me is really the function that if the thing gets in trouble, I want it to fly back and get close to where it's going to land. It'd be nice to have precision landing on there, and I fully expect they'll implement that on a future version of the firmware. So it isn't in there today, but expect it to show up pretty soon in the firmware. All right, the last thing I wanted to talk about is I got a ton of questions from you guys about accessories. A lot of you own the Mavic Pro, and you're wondering what accessories for that Mavic Pro can I transfer over to the Mavic 2. Now, the challenge with the Mavic 2 is that it's a different airframe. It's not exactly the same size. There are a couple of things that have changed on the style of the arms and the mounting things underneath. So a lot of the accessories that are made to fit on the quad don't work with this quad, but there are some accessories that are more generic that will work. So for example, you're using a takeoff and landing mat. It should be obvious that you can use that with any quad you've got, so that's good to go. If you've got the controller case, so the controller case that came with this, we sold a custom case that would protect the controller. Those will fit, same size controller will fit inside that case. The joystick protectors that work on the Mavic Pro and the Spark and the Mavic Air will go on there as well. I like those because these are fairly fragile, these joysticks, and if these things if this gets thrown into a bag and there's something heavy in there, you could bend these or break these or force them down and damage the sensitive electronics underneath. So I like the fact that you can pop these plastic joystick protectors on top of it and protect those joysticks and all the electronics below it. Those will fit on there as well. If you use one of these custom cables, obviously it's the same connection below. And again, I've got links for all of these on our website. You can find them everywhere, but if you want to support the channel, hit those links and buy them from us. But that custom cable is nice because it eliminates a lot of the extra cable that's dangling down below if you're using the standard cable that came with your phone or your tablet. In addition to that, there's not a lot more that fit it, but there are a lot of accessories that I've been testing for the last couple of weeks. So I work with a lot of accessory companies all over the world. I bring a bunch of stuff in when a new quad comes out, and then I test it. I go through it and really beat the stuff up, and then pick the stuff that I like that I'm going to use myself, and I'll list it on the website. So I've got battery guards coming in. I've got lipo bags coming for it. I've got clearance kits, which is something you should consider, because one thing I noticed with the Mavic 2, especially the Pro version of it, is that when you're sitting it down on a surface, even if you're using a landing mat, the extra weight of the quad pushes it down against the mat. And I found that the 1-inch sensor, because it's much bigger, has a hard time going through its power on self-test and actually rubs up against whatever surface it's sitting on. So having that landing kit that actually raises it off the ground a couple of inches is nice, because it gives it plenty of clearance to swing that camera around as it needs to go through that power on self-test, and also helps you keep it up off the ground if you're not using the landing mat, so it's not sitting down inside of grass or kicking up dust to get inside that mechanism. So that'll be coming as well. We have a bunch of other stuff that I'm testing, including that 5-in-1 power supply, which is something that I'm really looking forward to, because it allows me to charge those batteries really quickly at the same time. So that's pretty much it for today. I've got a bunch more clips coming. Like I'd mentioned, we're working on a ton of different things around the Mavic 2 and a bunch of other quads in the DJI family. I've also got some pre-release products that I'll be doing clips on, so definitely stay tuned to the channel. You're going to be really interested in some of the stuff I'm reviewing there, and I'll have those clips up sometime this week. So that's it for today. I tried to get through this as quickly as possible. I apologize again about the clipped pace here, but I know you guys really enjoy these clips, and I want to try to pack as much information as I can into a clip, but not make it 45 minutes if I can help it. So I think I did pretty well today to jam a lot of info in here. I have a lot of follow-up clips coming on other questions you've asked about the Mavic 2, so stay tuned to the channel. Give me a week or so, and I'll have another one of these up with more questions answered. So thanks again for watching. I love putting these clips together, and I love talking about technology. So as long as you guys are still enjoying these and finding value in them, I'll keep turning them out, and hopefully you're getting some value out of them. So thanks again, and until next time, happy flying.